Hello the internet, it's Wadjet Eye time once again, and with the relatively recent release of Blackwell Epiphany, I thought it would be appropriate to go back and review Gemini Rue. Well, I can get the whole Blackwell series done in one video. Gemini Rue comes from the mind of Joshua Nuernberger. With a number of design, illustration and development credits under his belt, he seems like a particularly interesting fellow, but Gemini appears to be what got him noticed by the world at large, and by Wadjet Eye in particular. So, gamey story talk. We're 2 centuries ahead of reality as we know it, and our first sight is a man who's about to get his memory wiped. It's one of those things that makes a lot more sense later on. Once that's done with, we join Azrael Odin, assassin turned cop. He's looking for his missing brother Daniel, and his search has brought him to the planet of perpetual rain known as Baracus. The planet is run by a mafia called the Boryokuden, which sounds really cool until you have to try and pronounce it yourself. Azrael's on Baracus to meet Matthias Howard, but he's been stood up. Insert your own surname as one letter off joke here. Not long into your gumshoe antics, you're given control of Delta 6 instead, as he wanders around the rehabilitation centre you saw in the opening. All you remember as Delta 6 is that you're being run through tests and you've been promised by the centre's director that you'll get your freedom if you complete all the tests. Also, it turns out this is not the first time you've had your memory wiped. Yes, these 2 stories are linked, but to tell you would be spoiling things and giving away a twist which I probably should have seen coming, but apparently I wasn't paying enough attention. As we've come to expect from Mad Bad Wadjet Eye, the game's art style makes it look like a 16-bit game with a 32-bit colour palette, adding in portraits when the characters talk. Normally this would be the perfect time for a comparison to a Blackwell game, but there's something slightly different about how Gemini looks. Maybe it's a bit more zoomed out, maybe it's because the characters don't have faces, I'm not sure. I still love this type of art style though, and I genuinely don't understand anyone who doesn't. The rain effect on the first screen is particularly smooth and sets the tone for a shitty mafia-stomped planet pretty well. There's a touch of the Blade Runner aesthetic in there, but it's not too blatant. Apart from the setting, detective main character, the music, the photo analysis puzzle... What was I talking about again? Where this differs from the usual Wadjet Eye fare is that this game has a verb list. Oh, Gemini Rue, you were doing so well. This is actually the most recent game I know of to still use verbs, or it was, but Heroine's Quest got released and messed up this entire line in my script. At the very least, they did exercise restraint. There's only hand, eye, mouth and foot to deal with. In that respect, it's no worse than The Curse of Monkey Island, and that's quite obviously one of my all-time favourites. And if there's anything Full Throttle has taught us, it's really fun to kick things. Something I quite like is that you get both the verbs and the inventory popping out when you right-click. That means you don't have to go to the inventory screen and pick out each individual item you want to try and use. Whatever you want to do, right-click will get you there. And where it goes wrong is when you can't just open your inventory unless you have something to click on first. Sometimes you just want to look at your stash, you know? They also let you double left-click to reuse the last verb you used, but there's no indication of what that verb was, you'll completely forget, and you'll end up just right-clicking anyway. Or there's the rather handy press escape to skip straight to where you're walking feature, which they only tell you about after an hour or so. There's a lot of this good feature but malarkey happening in Gemini Rue. So that's the basics of the point and click interface out of the way, now on to the new fancy stuff. You get a communicator which works as a phone, notebook and... name list? Okay, the name list comes into play when you use database terminals, which lets you drag names and locations into the search bar to look up people or addresses. Essential stuff for maybe the first half of the game, sure, but you're pretty soon done with it and it doesn't get used in the Delta 6 section of the game at all. Still, it fits the detective vibe pretty well, and it's more interesting than rubbing items together until points come out. Now, we've had point-and-click games that let you control multiple characters. Hell, we've had multiple Wadjet Eye games that let you do that. But those characters were all working towards the same goal, and they could meet up with each other if they could even separate at all. Azrael and Delta 6 are apart at all times, and nothing you do with one character will instantaneously affect the other. Whilst that doesn't sound as good when I say it out loud, it means you pretty much get 2 stories to play through, and if you're stuck on one, you can just play the other for a bit. In fact, the commentary, yay commentary, tells us that this was the creator's intention, to prevent that dread of getting completely stuck. You don't get to control them both right away though, it'll switch between them for a little bit first. Now this is partly to get some tutorials out of the way, including the moving a box and the shooting feature. In a fairly rare version of the weedy pacifist pointy-click character, Azrael will occasionally need to defend himself with his trusty bullet-propelling device. I can see what they were going for with this, but it's a bit awkward. You start by getting yourself into cover, from there you pick a direction to stick your head out, and then you can pick targets and blow their heads off. Problem is that it's all keyboard based. Yes, I have a problem with these keyboard controls. The irony is not lost on me. And the first time you try it, you'll be flailing to find the correct keys to press and the right flow of key presses to hit. It probably sounded awesome on paper, and whilst it's not bad enough to need rejecting from the game outright, it could have still maybe used some more tweaking. This of course means you can die in the game, and there's a couple of situations where straight up instant death will happen. The Boryokuden in particular have itchy trigger fingers. They're usually pretty well signposted, but you'll end up charging blindly into one of these at least once. Now, since I'm bound by invisible contract to project me feels onto these videos, I'll mention that this is the first Wadjet Eye game I ever played. Needless to say, playing it inspired me to look up some more, so I guess it serves as a good gateway if nothing else. However, I do rate this lower than games like Resonance or any of the Blackwell games. It's got little things working for and against it. Good things like characters turning their heads to look at you as you pass, and there's a sequence where you search a bunch of boxes with suspiciously familiar sounding names and content, especially the LSL one, that was pretty funny. Things working against it include graphical glitches like the receptionist appearing in front of your character, or half the screen not appearing when you load a save, such as when you die and it loads your last autosave. Yeah, not the last save you made, your last autosave, regardless of which one is newer. And then you get something which is kind of both these things. The dialogue trees mark which lines you've already said, fairly useful when you're going through trial and error just to get a guy not to hang up on you, and I think that puzzle would have been pretty rubbish without the line marking feature. Hell, even Resonance didn't do that particular type of puzzle well. I'm just hoping that wasn't the sole reason it was implemented. For me, the puzzles divide into two categories. When we're following Asriel, your puzzles usually consist of looking up information, finding places, and talking to people in those places. Whereas in Center 7, it's mostly object and environment puzzles. There's shades of both no matter who you're playing as, but both areas have their speciality, so to speak. The game will give you some minimal nudging in order to show you the tools you have available. Gunplay, climbing on boxes, using other people, kicking the shit out of things, etc. And it's done in a way that doesn't intrude on the story too hard, but could still well be forgotten when the time comes to use them. There's a lot to like in Gemini Rue, but there's also things to shake your head at. Unlike some of the games I cover on here, it's not too hard to get a hold of a copy. GOG, Steam, Humble Bundle, Android and iThing, they've all got you covered. There's even a free demo for you to try, and if you're even slightly interested, you should download it. I mean, it's free for God's sakes. The game still has problems, which can be ignored if the sci-fi story or the general I'm-a-play point-and-click nature of it appeal to you, but it can give the impression of a slightly under-polished effort. Personally, I was able to play it without any of these things bothering me that much, certainly not enough to make me want to stop. The story was interesting enough that I wanted to power through and find out the conclusion, and I could set all the other things like glitches and my own personal gripes aside to make that happen. And as I said, this is the game that got me into Wadjet Eye. So maybe I'm treating it a bit special, I don't know. I'm just putting all this out there so that you can decide for yourself. In my own personal conclusion, flawed, I think is the term. Don't regret playing it though.